Everything was okay for a few days until two ferocious, relentless, man-eating lions appeared at their camp. For over 9 months, they waged a prolonged attack on the railway workers and anyone else in the vicinity. The culmination of these events was on December 1898, when the two lions managed to bring construction of the railway to a complete standstill for 3 weeks. At first, they were not always successful in carrying off a victim. But as time went on, it seemed like these lions perfected their skills and would stop at nothing to get their favorite food. Their methods became so uncanny and their man-stalking so well-timed that railway workers began to believe that these were not real animals, but devils in lions' shapes. Most Indian workers would assure Patterson that there was no point of shooting at the lions. They were convinced that these were the angry spirits of two departed native chiefs who were protesting against the railway being built through their land, and by stopping its progress, they were avenging the insult that had been shown to them. The Man-Eaters of Tsavo is one of those stories known to many in East Africa. But what were the details? How did the railway workers find themselves in this situation? This perspective is based on Colonel Patterson's written account, who was then an engineer engaged in the construction of the railway. I'm yet to find written accounts or stories based on the perspectives of the Indian railway workers as well as indigenous communities. Patterson arrived in Mombasa on the 1st of March 1898. As the anchor dropped, their vessel was surrounded by a fleet of small boats manned by natives. They were shouting at them, very eager to offload the luggage and to steer the passengers to the coast. Patterson came to East Africa to take up a position that the Foreign Office had appointed him on the construction staff of the Uganda Railway. As soon as he set foot on dry land, Patterson inquired from one of the custom officials where the headquarters of the railways was, and he was directed to Kilindini, which was around 4 kilometers away on the other side of the island. The best way to get there was by gari, a small trolley with 2 seats placed back to back under a little canopy and running on narrow rails. These rails had been laid through the main street of Mombasa. So Patterson got into one of these garis and 2 Swahili boys pushed him towards his destination. On arrival at Kilindini, he was informed that he would be stationed inland and would receive additional information in a day or 2. In the meantime, he decided to pitch his tent under a palm tree near where the gari line was, and then he proceeded to explore the island as he sourced for supplies that he needed for the journey inland. Patterson was in Mombasa for a week before receiving an official letter instructing him to proceed to Tsavo, which was about 200 kilometers from the coast. So he was to take charge of the construction of the railway line at this particular place where the railhead had reached so far. So Patterson set off early in the morning the next day. So he arrived in Tsavo that evening. That night he slept in a palm hut that had been built by a previous traveler, and it was unoccupied at the time. It was, however, broken down and dilapidated. It didn't even have a door. So as he lay down on his camp bed, he could see the stars twinkling through the roof. Little did he know the kind of adventures awaiting him at Tsavo. Had he known that 2 male lions were prowling the area looking for their next meal, he probably wouldn't have chosen to sleep in that rickety shelter. Patterson had been in Tsavo for a few days when he heard that 2 lions had been spotted near the camp. So shortly afterwards, 2 Indian workers mysteriously disappeared. Word in the camp was that they had been carried off by the lions in the middle of the night and devoured. Patterson, however, did not believe the story. He thought that the 2 men had been unfortunate victims of foul play at the hands of their comrades. Since these men happened to be very hardworking and they'd saved a good number of rupees from their wages, they might have been murdered for money. Patterson's suspicion was quickly dispelled when one morning he was informed that one of his jemadars, a powerful Sikh, named Ungan Singh had been seized in his tent at night, dragged off by the lions, Patterson quickly ran to examine the tent and the site at which Ungan was dragged off. And indeed, he saw pug marks in the sand and furrows made by the heels of the victim, which clearly showed the direction in which he was dragged away. The Jemadar shared his tent with a dozen other people. One of his comrades had actually witnessed the incident. He graphically described how at about midnight, one lion suddenly put its head in the open tent door and seized Ungan Singh by the throat. He happened to be nearest to the opening. The Jemadar shouted, "Choro," meaning "let go," and at this point he threw his arms around the lion's neck. The next moment, he was gone. His panic-stricken comrades lay helpless, forced to listen to the terrible struggle which took place outside. Patterson set out to track the lion and was accompanied by Captain Haslem, who happened to be staying at Tsavo at the time. Haslem later met a tragic fate with these lions. Patterson and Haslem found it easy to track the lion since it appeared to have stopped several times before beginning his meal. Pools of blood marked these stopping places, where the lions engaged in its man-eater's habit of licking the skin off so as to get to the fresh blood. The railway workers knew this based on two bodies that had been retrieved before. The skin was gone in some places and the flesh looked dry, as if it had been sucked. When Patterson arrived at the place where Ungan's remains lay, a dreadful spectacle presented itself. The ground was covered with blood and morsels of flesh and bones, but the head had been left intact, save for the holes made by the lion's canines when seizing him. The head lay a short distance from the other remains, with eyes staring wide open. From the descriptions given by witnesses, Ungan's eyes had this startled and horrified look in them. The area around the body looked considerably messy, and this led Patterson to believe that the two lions might have probably fought for the possession of the body. They then collected the body together, heaped stones around it. They did not bury the head though, but they decided to take it back to the camp for identification before the medical officer. With this incident, Patterson vowed to rid the neighborhood of these marauding man-eaters. That same night, he set up a tree near the late Jamadar's tent in the hopes that the lions would return for another victim. Patterson was followed up the tree by some Indian workers who begged to be allowed to sit up there with him. All the other railway workers remained in their tents, but no doors were left open. Patterson had a .303 and a 12-bore shotgun. One barrel was loaded with ball and the other with slug. Shortly after settling down for the vigil, he had the ominous roaring coming closer and closer. After a while, the roaring stopped and there was complete silence for an hour or two, since lions stalk their prey in silence. Suddenly, they heard a great uproar, followed by frenzied screams coming from another camp about half a kilometer away. They knew that the lions had seized another victim there, and should probably not expect anything of the lions that night. The next morning, Patterson was informed that the lions had broken into a tent in the railhead camp and dragged off one person. That night, Patterson had to walk half a kilometer to the railhead camp in the dark, an idea he wasn't very enthusiastic about. He asked one of the men to carry a very bright lamp with them and another to bring a goat. They tied the goat under a tree in the hopes that the lions would snatch off the goat instead of a person. As soon as Patterson settled up the tree, it started raining, and in a few minutes, he was completely drenched and cold. He stayed up the tree, but he couldn't imagine his disappointment when at about midnight, he heard screams and a heart-wrenching shriek. At this point, he knew the lions had eluded him and snatched off a victim elsewhere. Sometimes the lions were not always successful in dragging off someone. Patterson tells the story of an enterprising Indian trader who was riding along his donkey late one night, and suddenly a lion sprang out on him, knocking both the man and the donkey to the ground. The donkey was badly wounded, and as the lion was just about to seize the trader, the claws got entangled in a rope which had been used to hang empty oil tins on the donkey. The rattle and clatter made by these oil tins seemed to frighten the lion, and he quickly bolted off into the jungle. The frightened trader was relieved. He quickly went up a tree and remained there shivering with fear for the rest of the night. Another close shave is that of a Greek contractor named Themistocles Papadimitriani. He was sleeping peacefully in his tent one night when a lion broke in, seized his mattress. Though he was rudely awakened, he was unhurt but very frightened. Not long afterwards, the Greek contractor was not lucky again and met a sad fate in different circumstances. He had gone to the Kilimanjaro district to buy cattle, and on his way back he decided to take a shortcut through the bushes to the railway, but perished miserably of thirst on the way. In another occasion, 14 Indian workers who slept in one tent were awoken by a lion jumping into the tent and breaking through it. So the lion landed with one claw in someone's shoulder, but instead of seizing the man himself, in the commotion, it grabbed a bag of rice instead. It made off with it, but dropped it off some little distance away when it realized the mistake it had made. These were the earlier weeks when the lions had not perfected their art. Later on, once they marked their victim, they would stop at nothing until they had secured their prize. It did not matter that the victim was protected by a thick fence or inside a closed tent or sitting next to a brightly burning fire. Throughout the weeks that Patterson was at Tsavo, his tent was pitched in an open clearing. It was not protected by any fence. One night when the medical officer was staying with him, they were awakened at about midnight by something tumbling about the tent ropes. Patterson went out with a lantern but did not see anything. In the morning, however, they saw pug marks around the tent. What a narrow escape. Through this experience, he decided to join forces with a doctor who had just arrived in Tsavo. So they shared a hut of palm trees, which they surrounded with a thick, thorny fence. Their personal servants lived within the boma, and a bright fire was also kept throughout the night. The camps of the workmen were also surrounded by these thorny fences, which are synonymous with the Maasai and other indigenous communities living in Kenya. Besides these precautions, every now and then the lions would jump over the fence and snatch off someone from the tents. The railhead camp had 3,000 men scattered over 500 meters on either side of the railway. Patterson felt that most of the workmen were not really worried about their safety because the lions had 3,000 people to choose from. Surely it couldn't be them. When the railhead camp moved ahead, Patterson was only left with a few hundred men to complete the permanent works. So all the workmen camped together because it seemed like the lions were aware the numbers had reduced and would make their appearance regularly. Some of the workmen wanted to quit, but Patterson urged them on by allowing them to stop all the work and focus on building high thorn fences around their camps. So within this enclosure, a fire would burn all night, and they also appointed watchmen to keep cluttering half a dozen empty oil tins suspended from a tree. The lions, however, were relentless, and a few days later they attacked a tent which happened to serve as a dispensary or hospital. So 2 Indian workers were badly wounded, but unfortunately the third one was seized and dragged off through the fence. The 2 wounded were left where they lay, with a piece of tent having fallen over them. The next morning, Patterson, together with the doctor, had to set up a new tent hospital closer to the main camp, and all patients were moved in before nightfall. Patterson had been told that the lions often visit recently deserted bomas, and so that night he stayed back in the hopes of bagging one of the lions. In the middle of the night, he heard the usually mortifying shrieks and cries coming from the new hospital. So once again, the dreaded animals had eluded him. The next morning, Patterson found that one of the lions had jumped over the newly erected fence and had carried off one of the hospital workers, the water carrier. Other railway workers had witnessed this terrible scene, which took place within the brightly lit boma since the campfire was still burning. The victim had been lying on the floor with his head towards the center of the tent and his feet nearly touching the side. The lion managed to get his head under the canvas and was able to seize the victim's foot and pulled him out of the tent. In a desperate attempt to prevent the lion dragging him off, he clutched hold of a heavy box. He was dragged off with it until it got stopped at the edge of the tent. He then grabbed the tent rope and clung tightly until it broke. The lion was way stronger and managed to get him out of the tent. He then sprung at the man's throat, and after a few vicious shakes, the harrowing cries were silenced forever. The lion grabbed the body with its mouth and proceeded to run up and down the boma, looking for a weak spot in the thorny fence where it can break through. Upon finding it, the lion plunged into the fence, dragging his victim with him and leaving shreds of thorn cloth and flesh as terrifying evidences of its passage through the thorny fence. Dr. Brock and Patterson followed the tracks where they found the remains of the man, about 500 meters away in the bush. The scene, as expected, was horrible. Very little was left of the man, only the skull, the jaws, a few large bones, and a portion of the palm with one of the two fingers attached. One of the fingers had a ring, and so they decided to send this back to the man's widow in India. They also sent back the teeth, which was apparently a relic prized by certain castes at the time. So Patterson continued sitting up a tree on some nights in different sections of the camp, but he never got a chance to take a shot at the lions. Every time they showed up, they attacked a different section of the camp. On the morning of December 9th, a Swahili ran towards Patterson shouting, "Simba, Simba," while every now and then glancing back as though something might be following him. He told Patterson that the lions had tried to snatch a man at the camp near the river, but since they did not succeed, they seized and killed one of the donkeys instead. The lions at this time were still eating the donkey not far from the camp, so this presented a good opportunity for Patterson to get the perfect aim. He rushed to get his heavy rifle. Together with the Swahili, they began to stalk the lions. Patterson was about to fire a shot from the dense bush they were hiding in when unfortunately his guide stepped on a branch. The lions heard the noise, growled in defiance, and then proceeded to move their meal to a dense part of the jungle. In desperation, because he couldn't imagine losing out to these lions again, Patterson hurried to the camp and summoned all available workmen, asking them to bring empty oil cans and other noisy objects. They went to a section where the lions were last seen, and they began beating these things in an attempt to lure the lions because of the noise. Patterson himself was behind an anthill near the opening where the lions would likely emerge from, and he waited patiently. Suddenly, a huge maneless male lion stepped out into the open path. Unfortunately, Patterson's rifle malfunctioned, and they eventually lost the trail of the lion on a rocky patch of the ground. He still had hope though. He went to look at the half-eaten donkey and was sure that the lions would come back to continue with their meal. Since there was no tree nearby, he had some sort of staging constructed about 10 feet away from the carcass. It was about 12 feet high and was composed of 4 poles stuck into the ground and inclined towards each other at the top. A plank was then placed on top to serve as a seat. The donkey carcass was also secured to a nearby rock using strong wires so that the lions wouldn't drag it away. At sundown, Patterson took his position at the airy patch. He was to be accompanied by his gun bearer, Maina, but he had a cough and Patterson was afraid any unnecessary noise might spoil everything. Patterson's prediction was correct. In the middle of the night, he heard the snapping of twigs and he could hear the rustling of a large body forcing its way through the bush. His presence had been noticed though. The lions began to growl. Instead of proceeding with their meal, they began to stalk Patterson for about 2 hours, creeping around and round the structure. Patterson thought of the possibility of one of the poles breaking or the lion springing 12 feet up. He prepared his rifle and started firing for a few seconds. He was sure he had taken down one of the devils. The other, however, made a run for it. As soon as the firing stopped, workers at the camp started shouting, asking Patterson if he was okay. He shouted back that he was safe and sound and that one of the lions was dead. A mighty cheer went up from all the camps as the news spread. The workmen came running to see for themselves. Patterson, however, did not allow for any such parties to go looking for the body of the lion, just in case his companion was close by. Patterson anxiously waited for dawn, and even before it was bright enough, he rushed to the eventful spot. He dreaded the fact that the devil might have eluded him again. In some mysterious way, he was relieved when he managed to find the dead lion just a few meters from where he was stationed the previous night. Their troubles at Tsavo did not end that day though. They still had the other lions roaming their camps. A few nights passed before the lion showed up again, this time at an inspector's house. He had constructed some sort of bungalow with a veranda that had a few steps leading up. The lion climbed up the stairs and began prowling the veranda. Thinking it was a drunken worker, the inspector shouted, "Go away, go away." Fortunately for him, he never attempted to come out or open his door. The lion opted to go for the inspector's goats instead. The next morning, the news reached Patterson, and that night he decided to set up near the inspector's bungalow. There was a vacant iron shanty close by, which had a convenient loophole where Patterson could place his gun and fire from. He then placed 3 goats outside as bait. Nothing happened that night, but just before dawn, the lion showed up and seized one goat and dragged it away. Patterson fired at it, but since it was still dark, he missed. As soon as the sun came up, they trailed the lion. It was easy to find him because of the trail of blood from the goat. Half a kilometer away, they found the lion still busy with his meal. He growled angrily when he had the search party approaching. Suddenly, he charged towards them, and everyone scrambled up the nearest tree as Patterson shot at the lion. A few minutes later, they followed to see whether they had been lucky this time. Unfortunately, the lion had escaped but left his meal behind. Patterson, as usual, suspected the lion would be back to finish his meal, and he decided to set up a strong scaffolding near the goats. He took up his position together with Maina, his gun bearer. They were to take turns watching since Patterson needed to sleep. He was exhausted from the many nights that he had to stay awake waiting. Patterson was just dozing off when he felt his arm seized, and looking up, Maina was pointing at the direction of the goats. Patterson grabbed his rifle and waited patiently. The lion stealthily emerged from the bushes and passed directly beneath them. He took the opportunity to make his shot, and he fired at the lion's shoulder. As he was about to make the next shot, the lion scampered away. On December 27th, Patterson was woken up by the terrified shouting from workers who slept in a tree near his boma. The lion was stalking them, and since Patterson could not walk all the way in pitch darkness, he fired some shots into the air to scare away the lion. The next night, he managed to shoot at the lion, but he once again got away, albeit wounded. In the morning, Patterson, together with a native tracker and Maina, his gun bearer, set out to look for the injured lion. They found the lion half a kilometer away, injured but still ready to charge at them. Patterson fired his gun and knocked him down. The news of the death of the second devil spread throughout the camp, and once again everyone celebrated. The reign of terror had come to an end.